Good morning, and welcome to the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. It's so good to see you all popping up on my computer in little boxes, but I so wish we could be together in person. As you probably know, throughout the month of January, we'll all be participating on Zoom, and we hope to be back in person soon. I'm Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry, and I'm joined today by David BVUUF, our service associate, also in a tiny box, Tad Coriath, Amy Austin, Clara Kelly, and Reggie Worrell. Oh, I knew I would do that. Worrells, providing music, and our AV Tech hosts, Eric Williams and Deborah Mensch. Reggie, you and I just talked about how to pronounce your last name, so my apologies again. As I say our welcome words again, I invite you to shift into gallery mode if you haven't already done so, and scroll through the screens so you can experience the lovely diversity of this congregation. You are all welcome here today. In all the beauty of languages, cultures, skin tones, shapes, and sizes that come together in your uniqueness, you are welcome here. In all the ways that you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. In the beauty that is who you love and how you love, you are welcome here. In all the ways that you make your living and all the places you are from, you are welcome here. Christian, pagan, humanist, Jew, Buddhist, mystic, Muslim, Unitarian, Universalist, with all of the traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here. No matter how long you are away, nor how soon you will return, you are welcome here. And whether you come today with laughter in your heart or with tears, you are welcome here. You are invited to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome everyone here today. We acknowledge that the land surrounding us is the stolen territory of the Arapaho people, and that many tribes freely roamed on this land for millennia before the arrival of white settlers. And we as a congregation and individuals commit ourselves to be anti-racist and anti-oppression in all of our work. This congregation is committed to being a center for spiritual exploration and justice making. And we have many opportunities during the week for social connection and spiritual growth, even on Zoom. So if you're new here, we're glad you found us and hope that in this virtual community, you can experience the warmth and love of this congregation. Each Sunday is different here, so please come back a few times to really get to know us. And to help you get better acquainted, please see the chat window for the links to our first-time visitor page and the email address of our office manager, Carol Pransky. And if you're not receiving our weekly email Connections Weekly, please do sign up on that link in the chat. It's a low traffic email list, and it is also the place to get news about signups for in-person seating for future services, because we will end up being back in person. I'm confident of that. And finally, if any new visitors would like to introduce yourselves in the chat, please do. We love to know who is among us. After the service today, we will be having virtual coffee hour virtual coffee hour, and some of them will be, again, facilitated conversations for anybody who is who wants to be talking more about the impact of the Marshall Fire on their lives. We also have Perla Delgado from I Have a Dream Foundation. And she is I Have a Dream Foundation is a recipient of our half plate today, and Perla is their new executive director. And she'll be also in a breakout room for anyone who wants to talk about that wonderful organization. If you have a chalice at home, you can light it with me as Eric lights our fellowship chalice. And so we know where all our chalices are. Please write in the chat, chalice lit in, and the name of your town. And you're invited to say the chalice lighting words that are in the chat along with me. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. And now I'll sing our bowl again, inviting it to draw you deeper into the present moment and into this beloved community. And we'll center ourselves with a few moments of silence following the sound of the bowl.
If Jesus made a tougher command as a way to live, I don't know of it. In his sermon, Loving Your Enemies, Dr. King acknowledges that there's probably no advice of Jesus that's been more difficult to follow than the commandment to love your enemies. In this sermon, Dr. King is countering the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who espoused that for Jesus to say such a thing was evidence that Christian moral values were designed for the weak and cowardly, not for the strong and courageous. But for Dr. King, traveling down the road of loathing our enemies will only bring destruction and devastation to our increasingly fragmented American society. Dr. King believed that loving your enemy is the key to the solution of the problems of our world, reflecting the central elements of his philosophy. Not only his belief in a divine, loving presence that binds all of life, but also that every genuine expression of love grows out of a consistent and total surrender to God. As a devout Christian and powerhouse Southern Baptist preacher, Dr. King's instruction to Christians is to, quote, discover the meaning of the command to love one's enemies and passionately live it out in our daily lives. So how do we do this? For Dr. King, first, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. That he who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. That the forgiving act must always be initiated by the person who's been wronged, and that forgiveness in no way ignores what's been done. To quote Dr. King, put us in jail, and we will go in with humble smiles on our faces, still loving you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and we will still love you. But be assured, we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. This is living out recognition of a power greater than us at work in the world. An integration of the internal into our everyday lives. Dr. King's sermons make it clear that he considered love as an eternal religious principle, his internal guidepost. And he considered nonviolent resistance as its counterpart in external reality. He preached that oppressed people of the world must not yield either to becoming bitter or giving way to hate campaigns, that such retaliation only intensifies hostility and contempt. As Dr. King said, along the way of life, someone must have enough sense and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate. This can only be done by projecting the ethic of love to the center of our lives. Each week, we remind ourselves of the abundance of our lives and this community by giving half of our plate away to those organizations that share our values. In 2012, our fellowship partnered with the I Have a Dream Foundation of Boulder County, or IHAD, to help launch what later became known as the Griffin class at Escuela Bilingue Pioneer in Lafayette. About half of this group of third and fourth graders have already graduated, and the rest are finishing up at Centaurus High School. Our particular class had some hard patches, with a change of program directors and accusations from Latinx parents about the quality of the program. When we have found ourselves confused by what we were hearing and experiencing, we've been an instrumental partner in helping make changes that better align with both organizations' shared values. With our help, this group of young people in the Griffin class will graduate and be supported to continue on with their education. Because of IHAD's wraparound program, from elementary school through high school and beyond, Dreamer Scholars, as they are called, are 3 times as likely than their socioeconomic counterparts to earn a bachelor's degree. IHAD's executive director, Perla Delgado, is with us today and will be available in a breakout room following the service to share more about IHAD and the impact of the fires on their Dreamer scholars and staff. Please give generously, as you so often do, and after you've made your gift, please answer in the chat the following question: where have you seen the power of love at work in the world? For the work of this fellowship, bringing love, reason, compassion, and justice to this world, and to the I Have a Dream Foundation of Boulder County, we dedicate our offerings.
In a 2002 UU World magazine article, the Reverend Dr. Rosemary Bray McNatt shares this story of a conversation she had with Coretta Scott King. During an hour of wide-ranging conversation, I mentioned to Coretta Scott King that I was in seminary to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. What frankly surprised me was the look she gave me, one of respect and delight. "Oh, I went to Unitarian churches for years, even before I met Martin," she told me, explaining that she had been since college a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was popular among Unitarians and Universalists. And Martin and I went to Unitarian churches when we were in Boston. What surprised and saddened me the most was what she said next. And though I am paraphrasing, Rosemary said, the gist of it was this: We gave a lot of thought to becoming Unitarian at one time, but Martin and I realized we could never build a mass movement of Black people if we were Unitarian. Now, Rosemary Bray McNatt is currently the president of our Unitarian Universalist Seminary, Star King School for the Ministry, and she herself is a Black woman. After that experience, she pondered what would have happened if Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had chosen differently, had cast his lot with our faith instead of returning to his roots as an African-American Christian. Certainly, his race would have been an issue back in the 1950s and 60s, and still today, our religious professionals of color struggle. Rosemary writes, in a religious movement engaged until the 1970s in the active discouragement of people of color who wished to join its ministerial ranks, King might have found his personal struggles to serve Unitarian Universalism at least as daunting as the Montgomery bus boycott. But Rosemary Bray McNatt takes particular note of his theology, his faith, and how our liberal religious tradition both appealed to Dr. King and proved insufficient. So today, in honor of Dr. King, I too wish to explore the faith of this American prophet and what it has to say to us in our congregation, in our denomination at this time. In a 1960 article, How My Mind Has Changed, Pilgrimage to Nonviolence, Dr. King recounts his theological journey. In 1950, as he was approaching the end of his seminary studies, he was drawn to religious and philosophical liberalism. There's four main tenets to liberalism: confidence in human reason, the primacy of the person, our centrality as human beings, the eminence or closeness of God versus a transcendent God, and the belief that human nature is improvable and improving. Liberalism, Dr. King stated, provided me with an intellectual satisfaction that I could never find in the fundamentalism of my upbringing. I became so enamored with the insights of liberalism that I almost fell into the trap of accepting uncritically everything that came under its name. I was absolutely convinced of the natural goodness of man and the natural power of human reason. There's one phase of liberalism that I hope to cherish always: its devotion to the search for truth, its insistence on an open and analytical mind, and its refusal to abandon the best light of reason. But King's lived experience as a Black man in the South rubbed against liberalism's optimism about human nature. Bray McNatt writes, liberalism's notion of the self-perfectibility of human beings was an inadequate theology in the face of the sustained hatred and embodied evil of the segregationist South. Now, King had optimism for the possibilities of humanity, of course. Just think about his I Have a Dream speech. He could see it. He could put his faith into that future. But that faith for him was linked to a faith in a personal, loving God as well. Early in his graduate studies, he wrote, religious experience is not an intellectual formulation about God. It is a lasting acquaintance with God. Noting that many Unitarian Universalist congregations have thrown out and even belittled beliefs in a personal relationship with God, Bray McNatt writes, for King to have answered the call to a liberal religious faith, a faith that clearly resonated with him since his earliest days of his graduate studies, would have meant a fatal separation from the source of his power, a faith in a suffering God who stood with suffering people. And it was his profound faith in a God that suffers with us that empowered him in his most challenging moments. In 1958, he wrote a book called Stride Toward Freedom, and he shared a deeply revelatory moment in his life. I think he was about 27 at the time. I was ready to give up. In this state of exhaustion, when my courage had all but gone, I decided to take my problem to God. With my head in my hands, I bowed over the kitchen table and I prayed aloud. And at that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never experienced him before. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice, and it was saying, "Stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God will be at your side forever." Almost at once, my fears began to go. My uncertainty disappeared, and I was ready to face anything. By 1960, his faith statement was even clearer. He said, "I am convinced that the universe is under the control of a loving purpose, and that in the struggle for righteousness, man has cosmic companionship. Behind the harsh appearances of the world, there is a benign power. Whatever the cause, God has been profoundly real to me in recent months. In the midst of the outer dangers, I have felt an inner calm and known resources of strength that only God could give. In many instances, I have felt the power of God transforming the fatigue of despair into the buoyancy of hope." You can hear that in the music that he so loved, in the African American spirituals we've been singing. That inner calm enabled him to lead a nonviolent movement that changed the course of this country's history. He shared that nonviolence became more than a method to which he gave intellectual assent. It became a commitment to a way of life. Now, although this notion of a loving, strong inner presence and a cosmic relationship, companionship, is central to our universalist faith tradition, sadly, such a God may not have been available to him in the Boston Unitarian sanctuaries of the 1950s. And even today, in many of our congregations, Unitarian theology, with its emphasis on reason, has largely overshadowed the abiding love inherent in universalism. I share this today, my beloveds, because I know that none of us escapes moments of suffering and deep despair. And although Dr. King was called to serve in a way that was greater than those of us here, all of us are serving, and all of us in our personal lives have challenges. We are also collectively in a time of ongoing weariness and suffering. You know the list. In addition to our very community recovering from this highly destructive fire fueled by the climate crisis, the pandemic is wearing us down, especially when we have to take into account the national and global racial and class disparities in treatment options. White supremacist violence is on the rise. LGBTQ rights are being challenged. Voting rights are crumbling, and our democratic system is at risk of falling. And that's on top of what's going on in your personal life. This is a hard time, and despair is in many of our lives. Rosemary Bray McNatt writes, "Sometimes a person's experience is informed by structural oppression. Sometimes it's just life that has weighed them down. But there are many people who have found help and hope and strength from a source greater than themselves to endure what has often seemed unendurable. I am one of those people. I entered Unitarian Universalism more on the agnostic or humanist side of things. But in recent years, I too have learned to call upon sources greater than myself and my community of beloveds, sources that are both deeply intimate and transcendent. Now, for me, the word God doesn't resonate, but when I can lean into a concept of a cosmic companionship, I too gain strength to carry on in my moments of deepest sadness or grief or even despair. The source has many names and no names at all. I personally struggle with any kind of a nouning of this abiding love. But I'm profoundly grateful for the moments of illumination and connection to that love which will not let me go. And like Rosemary Bray McNatt, I too want a Unitarian Universalism with a wide enough embrace to welcome all the varieties of religious experience, to retain liberalism's devotion to the search for truth, while also allowing the experience of mystery, of a love beyond all loves, to inform, console, and give us courage. I want that source of universal abiding love to be available to you and to anyone who comes into these doors in your hours of deepest despair. And I welcome conversations with any of you about where and how your spiritual life is helping you get through these times, or perhaps the obstacles you might be encountering. This weekend, as you engage with the Martin Luther King Day programs and explore his political genius as a civil rights leader, I invite you to remember the deep faith that fueled his efforts. And may each of you also have the capacity to tap into what you need in your own hours of despair. And may we as a community nurture and support your journey as we bring King's vision of a beloved community to life. May this be my promise, our promise, and our prayer. Blessed be. Thank you so much to our musicians today. That has been so beautiful. Your singing, and it very comforting to me. I have a couple of announcements. Today, Rosie, our spirit teacher, will be leading a family hike at Wanaka Lake at 1 p.m. We're going to take advantage of the good weather today. Meet at the playground entrance at Wanaka and look for Rosie. And we have a couple of breakout rooms. I guess, Deborah, will you be sharing about the breakout rooms? I'm looking to see Deborah.
Yeah, I'll talk about the breakout rooms when we get there.
Okay, great. So that's my only announcement for now. So we will extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, or the energy of action. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And I leave you with these words from the Reverend Sarah York. We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up as the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown. Amen and blessed be.